Right, let's jump straight into this explainer because today we're looking at a truly fascinating collision of global finance, cutting-edge AI, and environmental sustainability. To really wrap our heads around the massive scale of this, I want you to picture a cinematic, high-stakes graphic novel. Our setting? The global supply chain. It's this sprawling, deeply interconnected metropolis spanning the entire planet. But there's a problem. This metropolis is in serious peril, literally choked by a creeping, invisible threat. Our mission today is to unpack exactly how a revolutionary concept known as green liquidity is swooping in to save the day.
Okay, every good story needs a villain, right? Let's dive into ours. In this story, the antagonist isn't a single person, it's a massive, toxic cloud. We're talking about the heavy smog of Scope 3 carbon emissions. For the giant corporations out there, these are the emissions that aren't coming from their own direct operations, but rather from their massive, sprawling networks of suppliers. And this smog is suffocating the absolute deepest tiers of the supply chain. We're talking about the small and medium-sized enterprises, the SMEs, buried way down in tiers 2, 3, 4, and beyond. These local producers are the literal backbone of global commerce, but right now, they are struggling just to survive under the crushing weight of outdated, polluting machinery and immense economic strain.
Now you're probably wondering, well, why don't these smaller suppliers just upgrade to cleaner technology? Simple. They're financially trapped. Traditional banking systems essentially ignore these deep-tier suppliers because, frankly, they're deemed too risky. So they're forced to rely on these crazy expensive, short-term financing alternatives that usually cost them an agonizing 8 to 15% in annual interest. Think about that for a second. When you are bleeding 15% just to maintain your basic working capital, you have absolutely zero cash left over to even think about investing in solar panels or modern clean energy upgrades. The villain is winning simply because the victims literally cannot afford the weapons to fight back.
Which brings us to a super dramatic, yet absolutely critical question. How on earth do we fund these forgotten links of the supply chain? Well, it's time to introduce our protagonist. Enter Logi, the logistics hero. Picture Logi sitting up in this sleek, futuristic digital control tower, keeping a watchful eye over the entire global trade network. Logi looks down and sees that the big multinational corporations, we call them the anchor buyers, they've got plenty of cash and pristine credit. But down in those smog-filled trenches, the SMEs are totally starving for funds. Logi realizes that if we actually want to clear the air, we have to completely rewire how money flows. To pull this off, Logi breaks out a brilliant new superpower: Deep-Tier Supply Chain Finance, or DTSCF. Now listen, this is not your standard bank loan. I absolutely love this concept. Think of DTSCF as a massive bridge of trust. It basically takes the incredible financial strength and the high credit rating of that massive anchor buyer at the top and legally extends it way down the chain to those tier 2, 3, and 4 suppliers. Because the anchor buyer is essentially guaranteeing the ultimate payment, the perceived risk just drops off a cliff. And that means those deep-tier SMEs can suddenly get their hands on cash at incredibly low interest rates.
In a traditional setup, financing just completely stops at Tier 1, the big suppliers dealing directly with the ultimate buyer. But through DTSCF and using highly secure digital tokens, Logi's network pushes right past them. It maps the operational terrain down to Tier 2, Tier 3, all the way down to Tier N. By actually analyzing the flow of information across this deeply integrated ecosystem, banks and financial platforms can finally reevaluate their risk strategies. They can finally send capital directly to where it's needed the absolute most.
And that perfectly sets up Logi's master plan for environmental rescue, which plays out in 4 distinct, brilliant phases. First up, Logi offers the deep-tier supplier a green deal. Second, the supplier takes that fresh opportunity to actually upgrade their operations to clean energy, which boosts their environmental, social, and governance, or ESG rating. Third, an advanced AI system steps in to verify that the supplier actually did what they promised to do. And fourth, the very second that verification happens, boom, it triggers an instant, low-cost liquidity reward, basically an immediate cash payout at a highly preferential rate.
Now, the absolute linchpin here is verification. Because let's face it, you can't just take someone's word that they went green. You need hard, undeniable data. To solve this, Logi deploys these smart, physical environmental sensors directly onto the factory floors. These sensors act as the literal eyes and ears of the operation. They're feeding real-time data straight into an AI platform, meticulously tracking highly specific metrics. We're talking exact greenhouse gas emissions, energy consumption patterns, pollutant output, waste generation, and even water resource management.
But how do you actually make sense of all that raw data?
Well, platforms like Tech, which is a system famously used in major digital trade initiatives like Project Dynamo, they utilize three core pillars: environmental, social, and governance. The AI isn't just looking at one or two numbers here, it's evaluating over 1,000 distinct indicators across those pillars. It instantly benchmarks the supplier against international standards and their industry peers to generate a robust, completely reliable ESG rating.
Let's actually look under the hood for a second at the mechanics of this AI brain. First, self-reported inputs and those live sensor feeds are collected as raw data. The AI then processes, standardizes, and normalizes all of it. Crucially, it weighs these metrics based on materiality, meaning it focuses heavily on what actually matters most for that specific industry and company size. This rigorous weighting ensures strict, unquestionable compliance with the Green Deal. So there is absolutely no room for greenwashing here. It's a fully automated, mathematically sound pathway straight to a definitive ESG rating.
And here it is, the grand comic book climax of our story. Our deep-tier supplier successfully rips out their old, smog-belching machinery and replaces it with gleaming new solar panels and high-efficiency tech. Almost instantly, the factory's emissions plummet. Those environmental sensors we talked about detect the massive drop and beam the data straight to the AI. The AI instantly updates the supplier's ESG rating to target achieved. And then, the real magic happens. A blockchain-powered smart contract automatically fires off, executing the early payment without a single human intervention required.
The contrast is honestly just incredible. Before Logi stepped in, our supplier was stuck in this dark, smoggy past, struggling with high emissions and drowning in that expensive 8 to 15% debt. But after Logi's DTSCF intervention, we're looking at a bright, green energy future. The supplier is immediately rewarded with instant liquidity through preferential early payments. They now boast a sky-high ESG rating that makes them a highly attractive partner for future business. And, metaphorically speaking, the skies above the supply chain finally begin to clear.
The real-world impact of this kind of intervention just cannot be overstated. When we inject this green liquidity into the system, it fundamentally alters the economics for these small businesses. In fact, studies show that suppliers receiving these optimized early payment offers report massive 30 to 40% reductions in their short-term borrowing needs. That is huge. They're no longer reliant on predatory, high-interest loans. They finally have the actual financial breathing room to focus on long-term growth and true sustainability. And just to show you the sheer jaw-dropping scale this can reach, I want to share a truly surprising fact. Everything we are talking about isn't just theoretical. In one successfully implemented, massive deep-tier program over in China, Logi's exact strategy processed over $70 billion in financing over several years. Let that sink in. It successfully reached 9 levels deep down the supply chain, and the average deep-tier invoice unlocked a vital $77,000 for those SMEs. That is life-changing capital for a small Tier 4 supplier. But here is the really brilliant twist. This isn't just an act of corporate charity. The giant corporate anchor buyer sitting at the top, they win massively too. By successfully incentivizing their suppliers to go green, the buyer actually meets their own strict regulatory Scope 3 carbon reduction targets. Furthermore, buyers who utilize these dynamic discounting solutions can capture an average annualized yield of 10 to 12% APR on their excess cash. That completely outperforms your typical short-term cash investments. Plus, they get the massive bonus of building a much more financially resilient, shock-proof supply chain. Let's ground our graphic novel firmly back in reality for a second. Real-world heroes are executing this playbook right now. A prime example is the banking giant Santander, who recently launched an $8.3 million sustainability-linked supply chain finance program for Vestas, the massive Danish wind turbine manufacturer. They are actively proving that by leveraging advanced AI and totally transparent platforms, we can perfectly combine aggressive financial incentives with critical ESG objectives. As we conclude Logi, the logistics hero's mission, we can see the results speak for themselves. The smog has cleared, the ultimate goal is achieved: a greener, highly resilient global supply chain. We've seen exactly how combining deep-tier financing with strict AI verification turns the entire global trade ecosystem into a powerful engine for positive climate action. It proves, once and for all, that corporate profit and a healthy planet absolutely do not have to be enemies. So, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought to chew on. Take a hard look at your own corporate ecosystem, or even just the companies you invest in and buy from every day. Are they trapped in the old, smoggy ways of expensive debt and hidden emissions? Or are they ready to leverage AI and deep-tier supply chain finance
to become a heroic force for green liquidity. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep exploring, and I will catch you next time.